Hi, this is Margaret Hopkins, Superintendent of Grand County School District, and welcome to our weekly update. We have a lot of information today. We have the legislature in session. We have our survey results that from the board's survey that it has been conducting within the community. And we have our little continuing lesson on school funding. And so we'll get going on right now. The survey results, you'll be hearing more about the results. They are hot off the press as of yesterday afternoon. What we are finding is that the priority in the community is to keep our class sizes kindergarten through 6th grade as low as we can. Second on the list was to stay off of the 4-day week and keep our students on a 5-day week. Third was keep our secondary class sizes at a reasonable level. Fourth on the survey was, let me check here. Oh, the behavioral and academic support programs. That was fourth priority. And then the final priority was to keep our visual arts, music, drama in place as much as possible. And so keep in mind, this is not a vote. The survey was not a vote, but it is input to the school board about what the community is feeling are the priorities as we restore the district and come into what we hope will be ongoing new funding. And so you'll hear more about the survey as we look at it a little bit more in depth at a later time. Second, if you remember last week we started a little bit of talking about school funding and how school funding works in the state of Utah. So I want to do a really quick review and then add to the review a comment or two on the voted leeway, because we have community members who are still coming in just saying, I don't understand what a voted leeway really is. And it's kind of complicated. So a lot of this will just be in real basic terms. So as a review, if you remember, school funding, if this were a given year, this is all the money that comes into the schools. Each district receives, there are basically two funding categories. And one is just called the general fund. You might hear it called M&O or maintenance and operation. It's really salaries and benefits for staff members. That's about 92% of this fund goes toward hiring staff in Grand County. And last week we put all these little lines on here, and the little lines just stand for employees. And so we hire all of our employees out of this amount of money that's coming in. And then a second area of funding is our what we call capital outlay or our restricted funds. And so this funding has to be spent on buildings or facilities, maintenance of those buildings or upkeep for the buildings. And they're restricted. In other words, it's spelled out where that money has to go. And so basically those are our two groups of funds, and we have to stay within the state regs and spend these funds the way that we're told to spend them. Our first problem, and we'll review this from last week too, was that the district since about 2002, problem number one, is that some of these restricted funds were actually spent to pay for employees, for teachers and support staff. And this has been happening for a number of years. And what this has done is created a deficit in what we call our general fund, because we're spending too much money here and we're spending the money that some of the money that should be spent down here. That's our first problem. So when you hear that Grand County School District had a deficit, it was really a deficit in this fund because we're overspending in this fund. We have fixed this, but unfortunately, in order to fix this, you'll notice all these little lines again are employees, and so what that means is we have to lay off staff. To make the problem even a little bit more severe, most of you have been hearing that instead of receiving all of this funding up here in our general fund, the state shortfall is cutting also into this money. And that's requiring, again, more of a layoff of staff members, because we use this money to pay for staff members. And then up and coming right now, the legislature is in session, and you may be hearing that it's kind of going back and forth about what percentage cut to education will receive next year. And so we're, again, to make the problem even worse, we're looking at between a 3 and a 5.5% cut in this fund, again, for next year. So we've got our deficit, we've got the state shortfall, and the legislative cutbacks. And so this kind of gives you an idea of the problems that we're facing right now. One little piece of information that I wanted to add on this week, and then next week we'll come back to this and talk about how we're solving these problems, but is the question about what a voted leeway is. And so the state of Utah has made available to districts what's called a voted leeway, and it's really the only way that districts can make up extra money for their students. The district funds, the state funds our students at about $2,500 per student, and yet each district spends between $7,000 to $12,000. Some in Utah even $24,000, but we won't get into that right now, per student. But the voted leeway is a little option that each community has if they want to vote to increase their local property taxes. They can add money each year to their school funding. And so right now, and I'll just kind of put this up here. I know you can't probably read all of these names, but right now in Utah, we have 33 districts whose communities have voted to add money to their funding, their local funding. So they've put in a voted leeway for themselves. We have 8 districts in Utah, and Grand is one of these 8 that has a 0 voted leeway. And so as districts are grappling with these problems, what makes it a little harder for us is that we don't have the extra money like 33 districts do. We're trying to just use the existing state funding that we have and our existing property tax that is brought in. And so this kind of sets the stage for next week, when we'll talk about some of the different options that we can look at as we're solving our problems. Just a reminder that we do have on Thursday, March the 4th at 3:30 here at the district office, we have a long-term land and facilities planning meeting scheduled, and it will go from 3:30 to probably 6:30. We'll be looking at all our properties, including Red Rock, and what seems to be the wisest plan for these properties as we're seeing our shortfalls, but also as we're attempting to look ahead. And remember also we have our Tuesday board work sessions every Tuesday, 3 o'clock here at the district office. And on Wednesday, let's see, that's Wednesday, March 10th at 5 o'clock, I'll be doing what we call a catch-up session here at the district office. And that's just to go back in time, and any community members who have missed out on any of the information, we go back to September and start over and kind of walk through the whole thing so people can get a real good understanding of what we're working with here. So I think that's about it, and thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can check our website, www.grandschools.org, and we have most of this information posted for you there. Stay tuned to the newspapers, the radios. We're trying to really get information out as it unfolds, especially legislative information. And I think that's about it for this week. We'll see you next week.